visit a military base, and so you have to get through the front gate first, so stay calm. We are entering a National Historic Landmark, so let me do all the talking. I can't hear you anyway. Okay, that's the guardhouse, although it's changed its look and location throughout the years. So here we go. You see the railroad tracks on the lower right? Gone today. And even though this guard looks like he means business and the sign says no admittance, we're going in. Look at that barbed wire. And there's Highlands across the river. Now, we don't have to pay a toll because I have connections. So here we go. Some 3 miles to the second entrance. Today, the military police have been replaced by the National Park Police. And this is the entrance and guardhouse, which existed later, like in the 60s when I came up for visits. Now, we're going about 35 miles an hour on a pretty smooth road, but early in the last century, it took some time to get where the fort was located. It was also a dirt road for some time, and I'm going to show you some of that dirt road in a little while. As we get closer to the main part of the fort, we're going to have a better view on our left of Sandy Hook Bay. Okay, we're getting close now because I can see the fork in the road, and we're going to stay left. And here is the official welcome sign. And this, my friends, is a good place to stop for a few moments to get our bearings. Bear with me while I look for the map. Okay, here it is. Okay, now follow me here, okay? Here's the tip of Sandy Hook from an old aerial photograph. So some of the things on this photo are gone, but more about that later, okay? Through the magic of video, I'm going to overlay a map of Fort Hancock from the 60s, and here it comes. Here it comes into focus. You see it? So right now, we're here, sitting in the middle of the road, and let's isolate some of the main areas that we're going to visit. Okay, Lighthouse and Mortar Battery, two of the oldest structures here, but we're not going to go there or linger there. But we are going to visit Officers Row and later come back and check out the barracks. And between Officers Row and the barracks is the parade grounds, a big green area of grass, and maybe we'll see a parade later. Sergeant's Row. There's a lot of interesting stuff over there, and you can gets kind of complicated. You might get lost, so stay with me. There's the post exchange, a gas station, lots of things. And right next to Sergeant's Row is the athletic field, where we'll see some of the soldiers playing some kind of sports, and out by the bay is the rest of Officers Row. And this area, I didn't know what to call it. The theater's there, a chapel, a bakery, one of the firehouses, some old temporary barracks. It's a bit of a hodgepodge, but it's all very interesting and some very nice old photographs to look at. And here, my friends, is the Coast Guard, totally restricted, Homeland Security and all that, but there are some interesting things and old pieces of history I can show you through the fence. Just don't tell anybody. And then there's the ordnance buildings, which were connected to the proving ground, some of the oldest buildings on Sandy Hook. And we're going to take a look at them, along with the Officers Club and the power generating station. Pretty exciting, huh? You got it? Good. All right, let's go. Now, we could have gone right toward the lighthouse, but we're driving past the park and memorial area toward Fort Hancock's parade grounds. And see that little building in the middle of our picture? It's a public restroom, but guess what it used to be? I'm going to explain that in a minute. As you probably know by now, we have the ability to freeze time. So this building is what? All you have to do is read the sign. It's the quarters for the hospital steward. Hospital? What hospital? It was actually in that open field to the left of this house. And here's the opposite view with the park and picnic areas we passed just a second ago. This is where the Fort Hancock Hospital was located, but it eventually burned down. This is what it looked like, and it was right on the water. It was a full-service hospital. You got to remember, Fort Hancock was like a small town. Back to the hospital steward's place in that small building behind it. You know what it was? It was the morgue, and later a recruiting office, and today a latrine. Now we're going to drive, but we should walk over to take a quick look at the parade grounds. And this is where hundreds of tents would go up once in a while. It was a place to march and drill. Morning calisthenics were held here. Major military reviews for dignitaries and celebrities. It was the greenest grass within the fort. And the opposite end from where we are now is the fort's flagpole. And look, here's an old postcard from 1939. So we're still at the southern end of the parade grounds, and as we move the camera back to our location, here's a better look at the barracks. And once more, here's an old photo from where we currently stand at the south end of the parade grounds. Now watch that tree on the right, because I think I've located that same tree in the present day. Watch. And now let's pan over to the officers' row, where we'll pick up our journey in the car right after one more look down the field. Thousands of soldiers would take to this field almost every day for one reason or another. The architect who designed this fort came out here and visited for a few days, looked at this view and said, you know, it'd be a shame not to take advantage of such a view. And so the view is now a fantastic view. And if you were living in one of these homes, you have the architect to thank. Almost the entire fort was along Horseshoe Cove, as you can see from this old photograph. Can you see the Sandy Hook Lighthouse within the black square off in the distance? And if you liked Army life and the water, this was the place to be. Here's Officers Row with the lighthouse behind it. And you see a lot of these cannons in old photographs. Here's a view from the back of the house, from the parade grounds. You can make out that gun we just looked at on the left. So back to Officers Row and a few words about these houses. Obviously they're old, obviously they're dilapidated, and obviously they are in need of repair. Nobody lives in these particular houses today. Hurricanes and other storms have pretty much ravaged them, and it's a shame. It's not that folks don't want to make them better, it's a question of money and priority, but more about that later. So here's the final stretch of houses along the first part of Officers Row. Oh yes, we'll see the second part in a little while. All right, let's stop here and take a closer look at what time has done to this historical house, house number 16. It pains me to look at it, but this is typical. Now, military families lived here with children who went to school and played here, and wives who shared secrets with other wives were here. It was a different world, and this was certainly a different kind of town. It was Army Town, as a lot of people called it. When families lived here, all of the yards were landscaped, but today, not so much. Well, here we are, about to make a turn at the north end of the parade grounds where the flagpole is located. The first thing we're going to do is stop and look at the bachelor officers' quarters. Here are some views from today and yesterday. And back there is Sergeant's Row, and we're going to go there in a minute. But first, let's look at the headquarters building for Fort Hancock, which is today the headquarters for the National Park Service at Sandy Hook. There it is. Now, behind the headquarters building was the notorious guardhouse. The guardhouse is where the bad boys got locked up for some violation, but usually nothing too serious, or so I'm told. There they are, the guards, I presume. Here's the parade grounds again as we pan over to something which was right next to the guardhouse. It was the YMCA, which was a gift from a resident of Highlands in honor of his wife. The guardhouse we just saw is just to the left of the YMCA and built in 1901. Next to the YMCA was this, a handball court. It's still there. And that building to the right is one of the PXs, or post exchanges. Here it is. The PX was the company store, so to speak, where you could buy food, get a cup of coffee, grab some postcards, get a newspaper, you name it. This PX later became a storehouse when another post exchange right next door opened up. Right here, here's the front door. As you can see, it's right next to the lighthouse. Here's the inside of the newer PX, post exchange. See the snack counter over in the back? That's where you could get a cup of coffee or a snack or a sandwich. Outside, there was also a public telephone where you could make calls to the outside world. Here's what's left of the telephone terminal. And in the basement was a bowling alley, so you can still see this bowling alley when you look through the basement windows today. Doesn't work anymore. You see a lot of roads and/or sidewalks in Fort Hancock that seem to go nowhere. Now this is a small area next to the post exchange, which is technically part of Sergeant's Row. One more glimpse into the past. And right next to the lighthouse and the PX is the gas station. The car lifts are still inside, but nobody available to give you a tune-up. Sorry about that. And here, side by side, I've already said, are two of the oldest structures of Sandy Hook, the lighthouse and the mortar battery. But next is, wait for it, slow pan. All right, this may be disorienting, but we're going back to Sergeant's Row to take another look. Here's an aerial view of where we're going. There's the lighthouse and the post exchange and Officers' Row over by the water, and the rest is pretty much Sergeant's Row. Here's what these houses used to look like. And this was the athletic field as opposed to the parade ground. This is a field you could tear up with a rousing football game, although it did happen over on the other field as well. And here's a view of the opposite end of Sergeant's Row, looking from the north to the south. And here's a football game going on. Now that long building in the background of both photographs is the quartermaster's building. And to be clear, Sergeant's Row was for non-commissioned officers and their families. Today, a number of employees of the National Park Service live in some of these houses. The athletic field again. And once again, those disappearing sidewalks. And here's the opposite end of the athletic field where you can see the fort headquarters on the left and the bachelor's officers' quarters on the right. We're leaving the bachelor officers' quarters and driving past part 2 of Officers' Row. Let's stop here because this is interesting in 2 ways. Historically, this space was left vacant after the West Beacon range light was removed from this location. So in the 1930s, when the range light was removed, this duplex was built in its place on Officers' Row. Today, the house is being remodeled to become a bed and breakfast, which is leased by an entrepreneur. It's going to be interesting, so let's keep moving. As I mentioned, storms like Hurricane Sandy did a lot of damage to these old homes. But here's one that's particularly sad. It was called a history house, and it had been restored for historical purposes to what it may have looked like inside during the 1940s. It was a living museum, but sadly it got wiped out in the hurricane, and maybe, we hope, it will come back in the future. That long building over there could be seen from Sergeant's Row when we were over there. Not sure if you saw it. It's the quartermaster building. Now, generally, a quartermaster is a relatively senior officer, supervises and distributes supplies and food provision. This was the quartermaster's storehouse. At the end of this long building, a sign reads, "Storeroom." One clue that these buildings were for storing supplies is the loading dock along the side. There may have been some railroad tracks along some of these buildings as well. And do you see where the railroad tracks were right next to it? In front of the quartermaster area is the Post Theater. There were actually 2 theaters on Sandy Hook, but this is the only one left. Lots of celebrities and bands came to entertain the troops back in the day, and they'd either perform here in the larger theater or out in the open on the parade grounds. There's the front of the theater. Movies were 10 cents. Now, also behind the theater are 2 interesting buildings. First, the Fort's Bakery. There it is, with 2 chimneys. It produced fresh bread every day. These are the steps to the bakery. This fire company and rescue squad still operates today. Boats are kept in the back for water rescues, and they've done their fair share. And we're now passing the same firehouse. Oh, this is interesting. It was called the Corral, and it's where the Army kept its horses, which were used to patrol the beaches, as well as the footpaths throughout Sandy Hook. And here's a peek inside the stables. Now, there may have been joy rides on the horses as well, I just don't know. There were kids at the fort. And next to the corral is where everyone stopped to take a photograph with this big cannon called the Rodman gun. Ah, there we are, a family photo. Meanwhile, across the street, folks are waiting for the ferry from New York on the other side of the chapel down there. Here's a look at the seawall, by the way, from long ago. And here's a closer look at the chapel, which may still be used today for prayer, weddings, and other activities. Here's what it looked like with its steeple. Let's take a look inside. Now, as we move on toward the tip of the hook, we're beginning to see what's left of many World War II barracks, which were hastily constructed to accommodate the influx of soldiers during the war. And these are the only ones left. And you don't see many photographs of Fort Hancock at night, but these are fabulous because you can see the bay and New York in the background. Great photographs. And look at all these tents in the field at night. So now we're moving into that interesting area I told you about, an area where most of the buildings are older than Fort Hancock and made mostly of red brick. They were all part of the Sandy Hook Proving Grounds. And that 2-story building coming up had 2 lives. First, it was the enlisted men's quarters for the Proving Grounds. Then it became the fort's main school when the Proving Grounds left Sandy Hook. Oh, it had a 3rd life. Eventually, it became headquarters for the 7th Coast Artillery Regiment. It was typical of the life changes for lots of buildings here. Here's the back of the school. It's a T-shaped building, the only one on Sandy Hook. Here's one of those roads going nowhere. Actually, there were barracks here once, and there's the back of that school again. I seem to like that school. Let's pass the school and keep moving. According to old maps, there were lots of buildings and barracks in this field. Ah, bus stop. Oh, we gotta stop. Buses would circulate through the fort and into areas outside the fort all day long. Now, this house behind the bus stop was the Proving Ground foreman's house. He was the big cheese, the boss man, a man to look up to. Finally, the last house in this area still standing is the locomotive engineer's house. Now, there's not enough time to tell you everything about the railway system on Sandy Hook, but it was the largest train set that any kid could wish for. And across the street from the engineer's house was an interesting conversion from one function to a completely different function. It was a chemical laboratory for the Proving Grounds. But then it became a school after the Proving Grounds exited the area in 1919. And it's an odd-looking building made of different materials than a lot of the other buildings in this area. See, it says Fort Hancock School. I hope the chemicals were cleaned out thoroughly before it came a school. Okay, we have to do this quickly and then we have to get the heck out of here. Here's the entrance to the Coast Guard property, which is most of the tip of Sandy Hook. So on we go. Most of the main part of Fort Hancock is way off in the distance by the lighthouse. We're headed toward another structure built by the Proving Grounds folks. Originally, it was the officers' quarters for the Proving Grounds, but when they left, it became the Officers' Club for Fort Hancock. Now here's a photograph of firemen battling flames, which they eventually put out, and today it looks a little like a haunted mansion, I think. Here was a nice picnic area connected with the Officers Club, and here are the barbecue grills. Can you smell the steaks? And here's the back entrance to the Officers Club. It has a valet station for parking cars. Here's a sidewalk that actually goes all the way up to the house. Not in the best of shape, but it'll get us there. And somebody's cutting the grass, obviously. It was a great place to be invited. The Officers Club held parties and suppers all the time. It was a perfect time to impress the general. Here's what the front looked like, and if I may dare to say, she was a regal old lady in her day, and I'm not so sure she's holding up all that well. One of those parties I told you about. Here's the dining room. And across the street, a few more homes. These weren't Proving Ground structures, however. And down here to the left and behind that high fence were tennis courts. It was high so the balls wouldn't escape. Another duplex over here. And next to it, and over there, was the power generating station for all of Fort Hancock. It was right next to Battery Potter. Finally, and I'll bet you never thought I'd say finally, we're going to see where the soldiers lived and slept and ate their meals. We're looking at the barracks. So let's stop and take a look inside a typical barracks, although the picture does seem a bit posed. Here's what it may look like today, and here's another look from the outside. It's fun to find photographs and then match them to today like this. See? Let's do it again. Pretty cool, right? Now there's Officers Row, and here's one of the barracks. So as we drive, check it out. Different cooks, different kitchens. What was the sense of it? Why not have one big building? They're all right there together. I just don't know the answer. And here's the only U-shaped barracks of the fort. Here are the parade grounds where someone is leading men in calisthenics. And let's try putting an old picture on a new image again. Let's try this one. Again? Let's try 3 for 1. Ah, we did it. Sometimes, because the parade grounds were so large, they'd play a game of baseball out there. just like this one. And look here, some sea cadets proudly standing in front of one of the barracks. And here's the Fort Hancock Band in front of the same building. Soldiers at attention. And it's nice to see that some of the buildings are being refurbished and used again today. And here are even more brave souls who are bringing buildings back to life. It's good to see. Thank you. Well, I promised you we'd get back in time to watch the sun go down. And like today, I'll bet there were lots of families on Officers Row who sat on their porches and watched the sun. Maybe many folks watched together. And even the enlisted men might wander down to the waterfront to bid the day goodbye. I always enjoy coming to Fort Hancock at this particular time of day. The sun and shadows bring out the spirits of the fort, I think. There are thousands of spirits here, millions of memories, endless dreams and plans for a future without the threat of war. It's so sad that their dreams have not been fulfilled quite yet. But the sun always goes down, the lights always shine in the darkness, and everyone goes to sleep and dreams of a better day tomorrow. Good night, everyone.
Victory in this war brought the Philippines, Puerto Rico, and Guam, as well as Cuba, into U.S. possession. And the United States would forever after be involved in the affairs of the world at large.